Yeah, so we're going to talk about the return of Optimus Prime Part 2. So this is an episode that's very near and dear to my heart. Not least of which, because one of my earliest, most vivid memories is watching Transformers the movie for the very first time, crying when Optimus Prime died on VHS. And of course, as you'll all remember, in the UK, Victor Caroli famously stuck those lines in right at the end saying Optimus Prime will return. But he didn't say, on another video. So I wouldn't let my parents turn Transformers the movie off until Optimus Prime came back. I was a long way from our house. But I thought it would be a good idea to talk about this episode with the man who scripted the second part of that. So please give a massive warm welcome to Michael Charles Hill! Disclaimer ahead of time.
Yeah.
Go on.
So, my apologies to all of you. When David and I talked about doing a live commentary, we talked about 2 episodes. So I misunderstood and thought we were doing one on Friday and one today. And my first thought was I was just going to wing it. And then I decided that wasn't going to be fair. So I watched both of them, which I hadn't done in 40 years. And then when I arrived, I found that we were doing both of those on Friday, and we were doing this one today. And I hadn't seen it since the first air. So this morning, I quickly Googled the plot, and I realized, oh man, I have a lot of questions. And I've also learned that all of you know far more about Transformers than I do, because my knowledge is based on a very limited period of time that I worked on the series, and then you have to subtract 40 years of lost memory. So with that said,
yeah, with that said, let's go and see where this takes us. So this is the Transformers. So I suppose let's just dive in. So this is part 2. So let's talk a little bit about how we get here. Famously, Transformers the movie comes out. Hasbro kill off in 20 minutes the vast majority of their 84 lineup to make way for what would become the 86 lineup.
Right.
One of those characters being
purely a business decision, and not a creative decision.
Yeah. So Optimus Prime famously killed off. Massive letter-writing campaign ensues, or so the legend goes. From your point of view, working on staff at that point, do you remember what the impact was in the office following that writing campaign regarding Promise?
Well, the thing I remember primarily is the stories that we were hearing out of Hasbro via Sungo East. And it made it seem like it was one person, and of course it must have been thousands. But essentially, it boils down to a mother calling Hasbro and complaining hysterically that her son had locked himself in the bathroom, and who also was crying hysterically and would not come out because we had killed Optimus Prime. He would not come out until he was brought back to life. And the woman demanded that Hasbro do something about it. And then I guess they received enough of those calls, basically, that Hasbro said that we had to do something about it. So it was definitely a last minute. We still had empty slots for script assignments for the end of the season, but we were not planning on bringing Optimus Prime back for any reason until we realized
famously, you had brought him back as a zombie and then chucked him into a sun. So, you know, he was as dead as could possibly be, even worse than he was in Transformers the movie, where he was legally declared dead.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that that was something that was pre-planned before the idea of bringing Optimus back in the last 2 episodes. I think that might have been a filler episode. Because clearly, when I wrote Bird and Harvest Bear, that was paving the way for season 3, and Robin's being the leader.
The leader. And as we talked about on Friday, famously, that episode, Bird and Harvest Bear, almost brings Rodimus's hero journey, as you mentioned on Friday, to a close. And then, as we said, this episode comes along, and all of a sudden, it's sort of like, alright, okay, cool, Rodimus, because, well, we're about to find out what happens to Rodimus's leadership in just a few minutes. So let's talk a little bit about the genesis of this episode then. So this is a 2-parter, obviously, it's the Return of Optimus Prime Part 2. The first part and the story treatment are written by Marv Wolfman.
Yes.
Now, just in case anybody doesn't know who, well, do you want to tell people a little bit who Marv Wolfman is?
Yeah, Marv is a very, I guess, famous, is a good enough word, comic book writer, primarily from DC Comics, probably going back to the early 70s. Now, interestingly enough, he was a fan before he became a comic book writer. And in those days, a lot of young teenage fans were doing their own fanzines. And Marv has the distinct credit for being the first person to publish a Stephen King story. Because Stephen King was a subscriber to Marv's fanzine and submitted a story that Marv had published. So anyway, Marv and Lynn were best friends, so they became a writing team. And I think the first thing that I don't know if it was the first thing they did or what they got credit for was reviving the Teen Titans. And then both of their careers took off. The work that they did together, and Henry Marv created Blade.
Nightwing, who was responsible for
Nightwing. What was it? House of Dracula? Gene Colan?
maybe.
It was some horror story.
But of course,
Film of Dracula.
and then of course, Crisis on Infinite Earths for the system, yeah.
And then, you know, Len, his writing partner, created Swamp Thing, Wolverine, and a few characters in the Batman family of characters that he managed to get a lot of mailbox money for when Christopher Nolan's Batman movies came out. So.
And then to tie it into Transformers as well, this wouldn't be the last time that Marv Wolfman would be involved in Transformers. Famously, I say famously, I don't know if many people know this, but I believe he wrote the original treatment for Beast Machines in terms of the story Bible. He came up with the concept, the idea, and all of that stuff before it was ultimately handed off to the showrunners to actually run it. And he had, so his career with Transformers not only started with Generation 1, but obviously continued for another decade or so afterwards. So, he comes on board, the decision is made, you're going to bring Optimus Prime back.
Yeah, because by this time, for whatever reason, Marv has become the story editor of Transformers for the last few episodes.
Yeah, so he is tasked with doing this. But you mentioned it in your panel yesterday, the interesting set of circumstances that led to you writing this episode.
Yes. So for you that weren't here yesterday, I have 2 separate contracts with Sungo. One as a staff producer, the other as a writer, which guaranteed me a minimum number of scripts. And so it's a pay-or-play contract. So if we got to the end of of that contract and I hadn't written my minimum, they were paying me for not writing, which of course they did not want to do. So Carol Weitzman, who was the VP of Southern Art in New York, came to visit me one day in Los Angeles and informed me of sort of scripts I was going to be writing. One of them was Jen, which I did not want to do, and the other was I was going to be writing part 2 of Return of Optimus Prime. So Marv, with his writing partner at the time, Sherry Wilkerson, had plotted out both episodes. And when it came time for me to write part 2, I saw that Marv had detailed extensively all the scenes from part 1, not so much for part 2. But at least I had his first episode to work from to build off of on part 2. And if I think correctly, the early part of the part 2 is like a recap of part 1. Is that
It
true?
literally starts,
Okay.
right with the prime working mode, like
Yeah.
a few seconds,
And for the longest time, I took a certain amount of pride that I didn't have the opportunity to share with anybody, that I was responsible for bringing Optimus Prime back to life. But I recently realized Marv had already done that at the end of part 1. Is that correct?
Yeah, for all of, like, we're talking a matter of seconds. Yeah, absolutely. So, what's interesting about it though, you obviously mentioned that, you were the writer of this episode, but your credit on this episode, I believe, is teleplayed by?
Yes.
So, I think that was a conscious choice on your part, wasn't it?
It was very conscious. I could have easily have taken credit for the script, but the samurai in me would not allow me to do that. I wanted to make sure that Marv and Sherry got credit for the story, because it originated with them, not with me, and that I would only take credit for actually writing the script. So Marv had provided a simple, in his outline, I think which is only maybe 5 pages long, typically about 15, the simple beats in which the story, what the plot was, the order of the beat, and then it was up to me to just fill in everything else.
And so that's how you ended up with a teleplay credit as opposed to...
Well, I still felt like, because it didn't originate for me, it wasn't my idea, like all the other episodes I had done, I didn't feel comfortable just taking full credit for it and misleading anybody.
Yeah. And how difficult is it, like from I imagine it's a great writing exercise to be able to pick up a story halfway through and yet still try to maintain tone, pace of an already existing story. Is that a challenge at all for you?
It would have been, had it been my first script, but having worked on the show for so long and written my own scripts, it wasn't. As long as I knew what the beats were, it was, I mean, in some ways it made it easier, because I didn't have to make up a story out of whole cloth. I was just following his lead, and then I was able to add in tone, shade, and coloring, and of course, all the dialogue was mine, and the whole idea of bringing back the music and song from the movie, that was my idea.
Well, actually, before we get on to that, because that will come up later on, but one character we're not going to see, I think, for a little while now, is the character of Jessica Morgan now. That character originates in this particular episode, but you were telling me earlier that the character is actually derived from a bunch of real-life individuals.
Yes, little Easter egg. Jessica Morgan is based on Marv's daughter, who I think was when he used to bring her by the office, was maybe 15 years old. So her name is Jessica Morgan, which was Marv's ex-wife's maiden name, Wolfie. So he named the character after his daughter.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of inside baseball. I'm going to frame it as a question, and you are going to look at me with the most blank expression. And you're going, no, and I know the answer. But, so, this is where people are going to be like, oh, here we go. The character of Ultramanus. Okay? Yeah, you're lost already. The toy that originally came out was incorporated a white version of Optimus Prime. The toy of Optimus Prime. It was entirely white. When you have Optimus Prime coded in the alloy in this episode, he becomes all white. I know there was probably never an intention there, nothing like that at all. He has Optimus Prime all in white as he is. This look for Optimus Prime would go on for decades to be synonymous now with Ultra Magnus. All I want you to know is that through perhaps some random happenstance that you write in the script, he turns white. You created a continuity in children's heads around the world where they were convinced that the only reason they were buying the Ultra Magnus toy was to get Optimus Prime as he appeared in the Return of Optimus Prime.
Wow.
And when I say children around the world, I mean me.
And me.
So I can't recall it. Obviously, the idea of the coding originated with Mark. I don't recall whether the color was specified, unless. And had I been the one to do that, it probably would have been more of a silver look than a white look. Well, I guess it sort of is.
Yeah, sort of.
Okay.
So now we famously have the confrontation between Optimus Prime and Rodimus. Again, I always feel bad for Rodimus because he always gets dumped on a little bit, but we talked about it yesterday on Friday, with the Burn the Harvest debate. Just really bringing this story full circle. And then Prime shows up, and yeah, okay, he's under the influence of the hate plague, he's trying to kill him. But you just gotta feel bad for him. I don't know if you recall or anything, but was there ever a sense of like, oh, come on, I've just written this great episode, which was so personal to you, about Japanese culture, about the samurai and things like that. And then you're going down the notes that, Marv has left for you, and it's Optimus Prime knocks out Rodimus Prime.
I have no memory of feeling that way. And it kind of, I wasn't disappointed when I heard that you had to bring it back. I got it. I could understand why the fans were upset. So I don't think it troubled me at all. Now, I don't know if it's come up yet, but I was talking a couple of nights ago with someone out front, and telling me that their favorite line in the episode was when Optimus and Rodimus are fighting, and Optimus says something about they're innocent, and to use caution or whatever it was, and Rodimus' response was, "No one is innocent." He said that was his favorite line, and of course I thanked him. But it jogged a memory in me, and that was that is something you hear Optimus talking about all the time, is protecting the innocent. Don't let our war between the Decepticons affect the humans. And I think my response to writing that line, or Rodimus' response to with that line, was that in the state he was in, he was pretty sick and tired of hearing Optimus talk about protecting the innocents
it's an interesting point that you bring up there as well, because season 3, you know, I wouldn't use the word darker, but it has a more mature feel to it, certainly, than the first 2 series. And I guess that has a lot to do with the aging of the original fans and trying to keep the product fresh for kids as they grow up. And so perhaps the idea of Optimus Prime as this stalwart hero, this incorruptible icon, versus Rodimus, who through season 3 is a bit tormented, a bit conflicted, that worldview would perhaps exist a little bit, that you know, Rodimus would perhaps think that not everybody is innocent, whereas Optimus believes freedom is the right of all sentient beings and everybody is innocent, you know, and everybody deserves to be protected. So I think that's just a nice sort of juxtaposition.
My take on why season 3 might be different than season 2 is that the stories probably evolved that way because it was mostly the same writers of season to season. And I think we all got more comfortable with writing for the Transformers and started to break away from the basic plot lines that we were doing in the beginning. I know certainly after about 12 or 13 episodes, we realized we cannot keep writing stories about them looking for energy.
And here it is, perfect cue, Stan Bush plays. The only other time in season 3 that a callback is made to Transformers the movie in relation to the music was that you mentioned you just put it into the script.
Yeah, nobody asked me to do it. I thought it would be something that the fans would enjoy, and nobody said I couldn't do it. And there was no problem with it after I did do it.
And it's so funny because nowadays you would assume that would get stuck in legal mumbo jumbo. Like, that's the movie, that's the TV show, never to social media.
There would be all kinds of licensing issues.
Yeah, exactly. And here we are, we're at the end of the episode. I told you we'd made it without any problems whatsoever. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you mentioned this. There wasn't a plan at this point, I guess, that it might have been a season 4. And this scene between Optimus Prime and Galvatron, where Galvatron says, "You've earned my respect." Do you recall writing that as a fitting finale to the show, if it was indeed going to be the last episode?
Sort of, because up until, you know, when I did Burn Hearts to Bear, that was my thinking, was that with so few episodes to go, this is what season 4 would be about, as Rodimus as new Prime Leader. So, yeah, I kind of injected that into it, not to be definitive, but to be maybe a little open-ended.
Yeah.
And then decided we weren't going to do a season 4, and I don't know what point they decided to do Rebirth, but it was after I left, and I think that was only 3 episodes.
Only 3 episodes, yeah. David Wise wrote those 3, yeah. And that was it, and that's how Optimus Prime came back to life. Give Michael a big round of applause. Thank you so very much, and we will let you have 5 minutes and we will be right back with our next panel. Thank you.